Well, happy Halloween, everybody. 2021. How are you guys? I got Laurel Hightower with me, Jeff Thomas, and Scott Thomas. Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Hey,
So we do
happy
this once a
Halloween.
year. Yeah, happy Halloween, Laurel. Uh, do this once a year with the Thomas brothers. There they are. And usually have a guest or two. And this year it's Laurel Hightower. So thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So this is just kind of laid back, but we all love Halloween and we like to celebrate it once a year close to the holiday. And whether you're watching live or watching later or maybe listening later, I hope you have a great Halloween. So we're going to read some stories. We're going to tell some true life paranormal experiences that have happened to some of us and some poetry too thrown in there. So
Yeah.
So why don't you guys introduce yourselves? Why don't we start with Laurel?
Okay. My name is Laurel Hightower. I am, among other things, a horror writer. I have out one novel, Whispers in the Dark, a novella, Crossroads, and a number of short stories. And I've edited one anthology, and another one is getting ready to come out in November, first week of December. My partner is much more up on those things than I am. So,
what's the name of that one?
It is called The Dead Inside. It is an anthology of identity horror.
Oh, okay.
Fascinating.
Oh,
All right. Why don't we go with Scott next? Because Scott has a book coming out soon too.
I do. I have a new book just released from Weird House Press.
I have to get one of those shirts. Joe has to send me one of those shirts.
It's Veil of the White Horse and Other Strange British Tales. It gathers all my strange and ghostly British fiction that's based in Britain in the past, from Joe Morey and my pal and Weird House Press. It's Amazon.
All right. Anyone watching live, just let us know you can hear us and see us okay. Jeff, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jeffrey Thomas. I'm Scott Thomas's brother. I've got a copy of his new book right here.
Oh, nice.
Envy.
It's beautiful. It's kind of hard to see with the strange background, but yeah, I've got a copy of his book right here. And I'm Jeffrey Thomas. I'm a writer of weird fiction, horror, science fiction, and whatever. And I've got a new book coming out on a chapbook coming out on Halloween from Forbidden Futures, Forbidden Futures Press, called Scenes from a Village.
Yay, congratulations.
Yeah.
Wicked.
What's that about?
It's
the synopsis?
Well, if you've ever heard of my collection, I got a stack of books here. If you've ever heard of my collection, The Unnamed Country from Word Horde, which takes place in a fictitious Southeast Asian country. This is more stories from that fictitious country. It's 6 mini stories. And just as the stories in that collection form a kind of mosaic novel, this is a printout of the cover.
If you hold it in front of yourself, then we can see it better. Yeah. You have a nice background there in front of your yellow shirt. There you go. Scenes from a Village.
Kind of. Oh, look at that face.
Oh, wow. We've got a ghost here already.
It's 6 little mini stories set in that same fictitious Southeast Asian country. And again, like the collection, they form kind of a mosaic story taken together. From Oddness, Forbidden Futures Press, which is the artwork is all done by Mike Dubish, and the editors are Daniel Ringquist and Cody Goodfellow.
Cool.
Well, I want to start off by reading an email that just I got about a week ago, just from out of the blue. And he said I could mention his first name, but I think I'm just going to skip that as well, unless he's watching live and gives me permission. But let me read you the email because I really appreciated it. I sent it to Scott and Jeff, since they've done so many of these Halloween shows with me, and they really appreciated it too. So here's the email. Mike, I wanted to thank you again for putting on the Halloween show with Jeffrey and Scott, and many times with others such as Pete and Gwendolyn. As a kid, this was my favorite holiday. but as a young adult, I had a tragic event happen on that day, and it ruined the holiday for me for many years. The Halloween show that you do has brought a lot of happiness back into that holiday for me, and I can't thank you enough for helping me through a tough time of year. All the best. So to that person, thank you so much. I just can't tell you what a shot in the arm that was when I received that email.
That's
So,
lovely.
I know that so many of you out there, either watching live or later, appreciate the Halloween show and the Sunday show and so forth. But to hear that it's helping people just means a lot to me. So to the sender, thank you so much. And I know you are watching live, so thank you. All right, why don't we start off with, well, who does want to start? We're gonna, Laurel, I know, has some paranormal experiences. Scott, were you gonna read Halloween Tea or something else?
I'm going to read a different one.
All right. My thought is let's start with something short, short story, one of the shorter ones. And Jeff, I think you said yours was somewhat short. It's the one from
Yeah, Autumn Cthulhu.
yes.
Unless I've read it before. If does anybody out there remember me having read this before on one of the shows? I honestly don't
I
remember.
don't think
But
you have.
even if I have, it's okay.
It's called After the Fall.
After the Fall.
It was in Autumn Cthulhu.
Autumn Cthulhu, which you can see some of it.
And in an upcoming collection of yours, right? Or an anthology.
It's in a chapbook. A self-published chapbook. I did a series of self-published chapbooks that have 3 stories each, and it's in one of those called The Coming of the Old Ones, which I also had an audiobook made from that too. Okay, here it is. I did not practice at all, which I usually do, but 166. I know it's a short one.
Yeah. Well, why don't you read that, and then
Sure.
we'll move over to Laurel.
Okay, sure, no problem. After the Fall. The fossils in the sky appeared after an unusual windstorm. No weather forecaster had predicted this storm, and its wind gusted across the entire surface of the globe. The storm occurred in the day for those in the United States, but on the opposite side of the world, it shrieked in the night like a migration of banshees. Depending on the local climate and conventional weather conditions, in some places the wind carried rain or snow or sand, but nowhere on the earth, from pole to pole, upon ocean or desert, city or cornfield, was there stillness. The continuous wind was strong, yet not of hurricane strength. It did not bring destruction or damage throughout the hours that it blew. And when finally the high, ululating howling died down and calm returned to the air, and the sky became clear across the whole of the heavens, whether they were bright with day or starry with night, the fossils had been unveiled. Are you kidding me? Wayne's wife said, eyes wide with emphasis. You're still going to this party with that happening outside? Whatever happened seems to have finished happening, Wayne said in a mild tone, his back to her as he reached to the coat rack by the door. Oh, and you can tell that? Well, call Washington, Wayne, and tell them they found their only expert on the situation. Tanya, this isn't just some party for the hell of it. It's a family gathering for my nephew, for Christ's sakes. The reception after the service wasn't enough. With all the craziness going on, your family still needs to have a cookout, drink some beers in honor of the guy whose drinking problem got him killed. Wayne paused from sliding his arms into a hooded sweatshirt to turn and stare at her. He didn't say, fuck you, though he wanted to. He didn't say he was thinking of divorcing her, though he wanted to. No doubt sensing his mood, however, Tanya veered from the manner in which Wayne's nephew Keith had lost his life. Instead, she reasoned, what if in the middle of the cookout, the storm comes up again? It came out of nowhere the first time. It had. The storm had taken place 2 days earlier, and Wayne had been at work at the time in his cubicle. It had been an exceedingly pleasant drive to work, marred only by the knowledge that he was on his way to work. A mellow morning in the first week of October, and Wayne lived in a rural area. The roads were closely flanked by trees that were like atomic mushroom clouds of red, orange, yellow, green, the leaves almost fluorescent where the morning's rays shone directly upon them. The surface of the pond he passed every day was entirely covered in fog, luminous and golden, with thousands of wispy tendrils being teased upward as if the pond were a deep crater into which clouds had descended from the sky. But by noon, eating a sandwich from the cafeteria at his desk while he reviewed the quarterly inventory reconciliation, he overheard workers who had ventured outside for lunch remark on how quickly the clear sky had become overcast. In no time, his coworkers' voices grew more animated as they discussed the wind they said was rising. Within minutes, Wayne could hear it himself, whistling beyond the walls, and he finally left his desk for the lobby to have a look. He found others grouped just outside the building, gawping at the sky, which was not black as he had thought it would be. It was as solidly white as a canvas awaiting a brush. "Oh my God," one of the women had said, squinting against airborne grit as her hair started dancing. "Do you think there's going to be a tornado?" "Not in October," Wayne had told her. The wind had finally driven them inside as it chased clouds of dust across their cars, which looked timidly huddled in the parking lot. Leaves spiraled in the sky like the tails of invisible dragons. Yet despite the eerily wailing wind, no tornado had come, not even rain, and Wayne had returned to his desk and his work. He hadn't gone to check outside again after that, not until a few hours later, when the gale had finally died down and several of his coworkers who did peek outside started screaming. Tanya said, "Well, do what you want and give my condolences again to everybody, but no way in hell am I going outside until they know more about that stuff up there." "I wasn't asking you to go," Wayne said. "And you aren't taking our kids either." "Are you joking?" their 12-year-old Emmy said as she poured herself some soda at the kitchen counter. "Nobody could drag me outside if they wanted to. You just wait until those things start moving or something, come crawling down here out of the sky." "They're apparently dead," Wayne said, regretting he had shared this opinion before he had even finished uttering it. "Emmy," Tanya said, "get the United Nations on the line. Tell them your dad's got everything under control." She wagged her head. "Jesus, Wayne, it's only been 2 days. Anything could happen." "I know you're scared," Wayne told them. "I think it's scary too. But until they know what those things are, the world can't just stop, can it? People have to go to their jobs, keep things running. Things have to, go on." "It's Saturday, Dad," said Emmy. "You don't need to do anything. You should be here to protect us if something does happen." "Your father always put his family before our family, Emmy," Tanya said. There was a time when Wayne would have exploded at that, asked his wife to explain exactly how he put his family first, what it was that made her say such a thing beyond the need to prod him, anger him, diminish their child's estimation of him. But he had grown too tired to fight anymore. He didn't ask Emmy either, just what it was he was supposed to do to protect them if the seemingly fossilized entities poised above the earth did come alive again. Anyway, his family was expecting him at the gathering at the home of his sister Sherry, Keith's mother. He was already running late. Without another word, he finished slipping on his hoodie and went to the door, thinking that if the world kept on maintaining itself in the wake of this manifestation, he would indeed go through with it and divorce his wife. Maybe this event didn't herald the end of humanity, but a new beginning. He then thought, such a typically human response, looking for meaning where none might exist, looking for signs in the sky, animals in the clouds. Just as he started his car, his other daughter, 15-year-old Crystal, came running from the house, pulling on her own hoodie and grinning wildly. A bit surprised, Wayne watched as Crystal flung open the passenger's door and bounced in beside him. "I want to go too, Dad," she explained. "I loved my cousin." "Does your mom know you're coming with me?" "Not yet, so you'd better hurry," she laughed and locked the door. In the past, Wayne would have been too afraid to incur further anger from Tanya by driving off with Crystal just then. But he hesitated only a moment or two, smiled at her, then backed his car into the street. Just because this event might not be designed as a new beginning didn't mean it couldn't be one. Along the drive to Sherry's home in a neighboring town, Crystal repeatedly craned her neck to gaze up at the sky through her window with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Meanwhile, in her lap, she thumbed her phone's colorful screen, alternating between searching out stories about the phenomenon on the internet and exchanging dramatic texts with her friends. "It's doomsday, bitches," Crystal read out loud. "Besides that observation," Wayne said, "are there any more ideas about this on the news?" "Well," Crystal replied, "looks like regular airplane flights are still canceled, but I guess helicopters and military planes have been going up for a better look. Sounds like the things look the same, even if you go up there. Not any closer or clearer or anything. So the images aren't inside our atmosphere, but outside. Probably. They're like showing through our atmosphere. Yeah, so I guess in space. I wonder if satellites can see them. Anyway, I'll bet the government knows more than they're telling. They always do. They arrived at Sherry's home, parked their car behind others still in the driveway, and went around to her sizable backyard, its swimming pool covered till next summer, if next summer should in fact come, to find that the yard was decorated as if for an early Halloween party. Cleverly carved jack-o'-lanterns on the picnic table and elsewhere, candles in little paper bags stenciled with witches and black cats, black and orange crepe paper, bunting, bowls of popcorn, dishes of candy corn, jugs of cider. From a CD player, Orson Welles reported on the invasion of Earth by Martians. All of this was Sherry's work. Wayne had often teased her about being a Martha Stewart wannabe. Mixed with these accoutrements, however, were other accoutrements left over from summer, coolers of beer and aromatic smoke rising from the grill tended by Sherry's husband, Dave. He had always filled several plates with burgers and hot dogs. He had already filled several plates with burgers and hot dogs. The air had a bit of Christmas to it today, but it was still comfortable. The sun shone, the sky was blue and full of monsters. Sherry couldn't take credit for those. Wayne realized he was grinning as he crossed the grass toward his sister, who had spotted him and came to meet him halfway. He explained to Crystal walking beside him, Keith always loved Halloween so much. Dad, we all do in our family. His sister hugged him too tightly. Very cool, sis, he said to her. Very cool. He would have loved it, she said. Her voice was cracked around the edges. I was just saying that to Crystal. The funeral had been on Wednesday, the day before the event. He hadn't seen his sister since then, but he called her to make sure she was safe and doing okay. Crystal drifted off to talk with some cousins while Sherry walked Wayne over to where her husband was cooking. The two men shook hands, then Dave insisted Wayne grab himself some chicken. He'd been busy. Wayne was sure the busyness helped keep his focus off his son. Wayne glanced toward a cooler, necks of pumpkin-flavored ale poking up from the crushed ice. He remembered what Tanya had said, alluding to Keith's death. Keith had been a contractor, reshingling a roof that day, and had indulged in too many beers at lunch. Though he should have been accustomed to drinking too many beers, and the fall wasn't really that far. Wayne had heard of skydivers who had survived falls when their parachutes didn't open. Keith had landed just right, or rather, just wrong. How fragile humans, like bugs crushed in an instant under the steps of vast unthinking forces, neither of which could really see nor fathom each other. Fuck it, Wayne muttered to himself and went to the cooler and pulled free a beer. His father and mother sat in plastic lawn chairs nearby. His mother's face looked crumpled in on itself, her eyes reddened, as if she hadn't stopped crying since he had last seen her on Wednesday. She had lost her first grandchild. Wayne went to them, leaned down to hug his mother. His father raised his own beer, an Irish red. He'd obviously already had a couple. Slante, he said. Wayne clinked bottles with his elderly father, then sucked at his beer and went down good. It was a good moment. If Crystal had come up to him just then and asked for her own beer, he would have given her one, not to spite his wife, not even because the world had changed and might soon end for all they knew, but just because it was a good moment. He wondered then, why did it often take death to bring people together like this? Wayne had rushed toward his company's lobby again to see what all the screaming and shouting was about. Most of the spectators who had already gathered there were afraid to venture outside, despite the fact that the storm had abated, pressing themselves close to the full-length windows that lined the front wall. But some braver souls had gone out into the parking lot. Because he didn't want to nudge his way through the bodies massed at the windows, Wayne also stepped directly outside. Like the others, he immediately tilted his head back to gawk open-mouthed at the sky. The blank white cloud cover had been entirely blown away, leaving what would have been a pristine blue sky like glazed ceramic, were it not for the translucent white shapes that entirely covered the dome of the heavens like chalk drawings rendered by a brilliant madman on a surface of opaque blue glass. Those are clouds, right? One woman asked shakily, holding onto a coworker's arm. They're just freaky cloud formations, right? I don't think so, murmured the man whose arm she squeezed. Is it a mirage? Someone else asked feebly. Perhaps fearing they were all experiencing a hallucination brought on by mass hysteria, one of the workers glanced at two men directly beside him and said, Tell me what you're seeing. Teeth, ribs, snakes, one man said. Legs, claws, said the other man. Centipedes? Bones was all Wayne could say. The cloud-like images in the cloudless sky were a mad jumble, a tangle, an interwoven tapestry of unthinkably immense bodies. It was difficult, almost impossible to tell where one body ended and another began, even though no two creatures were identical. Their detail was somewhat misty, but still clear enough to appear almost tangible, almost solid, like skeletons lying in a shallow blue pool. Eyeless maybe faces, spread open like flowers, with multiple jaws or spiral whorls of fangs, reminding one of hagfish or lampreys. Ribbons of comb-toothed ribs, like the curtains of an aurora borealis. Exposed, seemingly calcified organs, torn or exploded, from which protruded bundles of ropey tendrils, reminding Wayne of a dog's served in a bottle he had seen in a veterinarian's office as a boy, cut open to show the heartworms nested inside. Over there, were those the struts of wings? And there, stag beetle mandibles or a set of barbed antlers? And those, spider legs or vast skeletal hands? Had the flesh all decomposed centuries or millennia or millions of years ago? Or had these beings never been covered in flesh? Fish, insects, dinosaurs, terrestrial comparisons ultimately failed, but it was all the worker's head by which to process what they were seeing. Only one thing was certain, none of it moved. These were plainly the remains of expired life forms. That the creatures were dead was the only thing that ensured the spectator's sanity. Come on, one employee said. Someone's got to be projecting these things, like the ghosts in the haunted mansion, you know? Wayne heard someone else trying to rationalize the revelation in similarly human terms, suggest that windstorm, someone must have released drugs in the air, mind-controlled drugs to give us delusions, our government or an enemy government. Maybe it's some kind of advertisement, another said, for a movie or something. But Wayne overheard yet another of his co-workers, who originated from Haiti, mutter to himself, "It's hell." A breeze stirred to life, causing many of the leaves dislodged in the storm to scrabble across the parking lot like a horde of crabs. The woman clutching her co-worker's arm, Wayne had long suspected them of having an affair, pressed her face into his chest and sobbed. But the benign little breeze faded away quickly, and the leaves went inanimate again. A young man emerged from the building then and blurted, "It's on the news. They're seeing the same thing all over the world." When the sun went down, no longer glowing through the dense web of ghostly bones, leaving only a pink-orange swath above the silhouetted treetops, Dave lit a metal outdoors fireplace against the growing chill. Those relatives and family friends who hadn't already headed home sat or stood around the fire drinking beers or coffee. Some of Keith's young friends lingered, including his former girlfriend, weeping and inebriated. Sherry lit the candles in the little paper bags and the jack-o'-lanterns, of course, which grinned and flickered to guide the dead or repel the dead or something. Wayne forgot the original meaning. The fossils did not vanish in the darkness, but in fact became more distinct, sharper in outline, brightly luminous, as if they reflected the sun, as did a full moon, though they were lit by no sun of this solar system, maybe no sun of this dimension. But in the black spaces between the latest bodies, familiar stars peaked and twinkled, as if to offer some measure of reassurance. Thick woods bordered the rear of Sherry's property, and a light wind came up, causing the trees there to rustle ominously, as if something huge were making its way through them. Wayne shuddered and stared into the restless dark foliage, but the disturbance subsided. He figured a lot of people would be gun-shy about the wind for some time to come. Gun-shy about a lot of things they'd once taken for granted, like the sky. Wayne's father stood nearby unsteadily and wagged his cane at the heavens as if to challenge the dome of phosphorescent bones. "I'll be glad when a regular goddamn storm comes along so the clouds will cover up these bastards and we won't have to look at them for a while." "I'd be afraid of that," Wayne's mother fretted. "What if they're radioactive? I'm afraid the rain might be poisoned." "I wonder," said one of Keith's friends, "if we could, like, shoot nuclear warheads up at them, blow the motherfuckers right out of the sky." "They're not really in the sky," another of Keith's friends said. "They just look like they are. They're like in some other sky." "Say what?" Crystal came close to her father's side. "Mom called again." "Is she still furious?" "I think she's gone from furious to merely pissed. She just wants to know when we're coming home. I think she's lonely with no one to fight with. Hey, you said that, not me. Dad, do you think everything will change? You mean with your mom? No, I mean with the world. Maybe. Everybody's looking and talking and thinking about the same thing. Wayne sipped his beer. Until the next celebrity goes into rehab anyway. Yeah, his brother-in-law Dave said, listening in. If we get through this, I mean, if this doesn't hurt us, you know, in no time, we'll all take it for granted like we do everything else. We'll kind of stop seeing it. Were they always there and we just couldn't see them before? Crystal asked her father and uncle. Or did they come here from someplace else just now? I think they were always there, Wayne said. Maybe always will be, even after we're long gone. I wish Keith could have seen them, Dave said, gazing upward wistfully. He wouldn't have been scared. He'd have been excited. It's really kind of a miracle. Like everything else in the universe, Wayne agreed. But everything dies, Dave said. You see that? He pointed with his own beer. Even them. As Wayne continued staring at the display suspended thousands of feet or miles or light years above his company, shuffling in circles to study different areas like a tourist marveling at the sailing of the Sistine Chapel, it became apparent to him that these impossibly colossal animals or sentient beings or gods had been the cause of their own extinction. One creature that Wayne likened to an isopod with a head like the skull of a prehistoric whale without eye sockets, had its jaws clamped around the body of another beast that resembled some kind of eel larvae with a bunched head like a clenched fist and a crest down its back like a row of praying mantis forelimbs. Another titan that was all spiny vertebrae with a featureless globe of bone at either end of its serpentine body had died, locked in combat with what looked like an uprooted tree or section of coral, its branches having once tapered into strangling tentacles, its trunk constricted by its opponent's barbed coils. Wayne's eyes were able to untangle more and more of these scenarios from the chaotic scene above him, though the effort was giving him a stabbing headache. It had been an orgy of killing, but had these heterogeneous entities all been enemies, or had they entered into some kind of suicide pact, having agreed that their reign must come to an end? Determining how they had died was something, Wayne supposed, but in the end, it gave no larger answers. Even then, on the first day, he knew that answers might never be forthcoming for the minuscule inhabitants of this tiny world, which might not even have existed when the epic battle or mutual extermination had raged. Imagine seeing them move, a coworker said to Wayne in awe. Imagine the sounds they all made. I can't look at them anymore, another employee cried out suddenly, turning and fleeing back inside their building. More babbling voices. What if they come back to life? They're dead, Maura. What if living ones come? I need to get home to my kids. Shit, why am I taking pictures? This person held. Why aren't I taking pictures? This person held his cell phone aloft. Others' phones rang as frantic loved ones called. Dogs were barking everywhere, as if they sensed something was amiss. So what is this, the end of the world or something? The end of theirs, anyway, Wayne said, gesturing at the fossils. Car headlights pulled into Chevy's driveway, then were extinguished. Moments later, two dark figures walked toward the group, clustered around the fireplace. Tanya and Emmy stepped into its glow. Tanya hugged Sherry for a long time, then hugged Dave. Then she turned and slung an arm around Crystal's shoulders, pulling her oldest daughter against her. Ack, don't choke me, Crystal cried. Brat, Tanya said. She met Wayne's eyes in the dancing red light. He nodded at her and smiled. She gave him a nervous little smile in return. Hey, there's still some chicken, Dave said. They opened more beers. Wayne raised his bottle above his head. We should drink a toast to our new gods. Oh, Wayne, don't say that, his mother said. Hey, they're the only gods we have evidence of. Maybe that's how they died, fighting over who's going to be our god. Like they'd even care about us, Crystal said. I'll drink to them, Dave said, lifting his own bottle. I bet we won't be the only people worshiping them. Got to stay on the good side, Wayne said. Ah, fuck it, Wayne's father slurred gruffly, cracking a fresh beer. I'll drink to the bastards. He thrust his Irish red in the air. All the others lifted their drinks high, then, like a group of irreverent cultists. Another little gust of breeze rose up, and the black trees massed at the border of the property shifted and hissed, as if phantom gods were whispering something alien and unknowable to acknowledge those who followed them.
Great story.
Thank you.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, Mark Jones in the live chat, Jeff says, I remember reading this story. The visual of the fossils in the sky has always stuck with me. On days you can see the moon during a bright day, I always think of this story.
Ah,
Thought you'd like to hear that.
rewarding.
All right. Now I'm going to read several poems tonight, not in a row, but just sort of between what you guys do, by my favorite poet, Robert Frost. And he's not a poet that most people think of as a dark poet, but he was really, and a lot of his poetry was like that. So here's one, and then I want to talk with Laurel. And her novella Crossroads is kind of a ghost story, very dark, and if you're a parent, it'll really grab you by the throat and not let you go. So it's really great.
Thank you.
Right up to the last lines of the novella, I have to say.
Thank you.
Sure. We'll talk about the cat thing later.
Gonna hold a grudge.
Yeah, it's not me. My cats are holding a grudge. My November Guest by Robert Frost. My sorrow when she's here with me thinks these dark days of autumn rain are beautiful as days can be. She loves the bare, the withered tree. She walks the sodden pasture lane. Her pleasure will not let me stay. She talks and I am fain to list. She's glad the birds are gone away. She's glad her simple worsted gray is silver now with clinging mist. The desolate, deserted trees, the faded earth, the heavy sky, the beauties she so truly sees, she thinks I have no eye for these, and vexes me for reason why. Not yesterday, I learned to know the love of bare November days before the coming of the snow, but it were vain to tell her so, and they are better for her praise. Definitely an autumn poem if I've ever heard one.
Lovely.
So,
Yeah,
Lovely.
nice and brief.
yeah, like I said, my favorite poet. You know, the obvious would be to read poems by Poe or someone similar, but you know, we've all read those poems, and thought I'd throw a few autumnal or dark poems out there by Robert Frost, which maybe some of the audience aren't aware of as of yet. So anyway, you have to put up with it because he's my favorite poet. So there you go. Real briefly, Laurel, tell us what Crossroads is about, since it's exactly that kind of story, the kind of novella that you'd be perfect to read on a Halloween or an autumn evening. So
Okay, yeah, I'll just do kind of a quick summary of it. It's the
sure.
story of a woman named Chris, whose adult son Trey passed away a couple of years before in a single car accident. And so she's divorced from Trey's father. That happened when he was very little. So her life was just kind of built around Trey. And when he died, she didn't really know how to pivot. So she goes every day after work to the roadside cross where he died. She doesn't visit him at the cemetery. They creep her out, but she feels close to him where he died. And so she just sort of like built a little bit of a half life, just kind of, sometimes kind of pretending he's not dead, and talking to him all the time. And then one night when she goes to the cross, she's cut herself, she bleeds on the ground. And that night, in the middle of the night, she's woken up and she sees her son outside the window. So it kind of just goes from there. She, as you might imagine, does whatever she can to try and continue to see him and to get closer to him. And it gets pretty rough.
It does, yeah. That's a great one to read, like I said, on an autumn night or a Halloween night. I recently interviewed Stuart Onan, who wrote The Night Country. Scott, I sent you a copy of that whenever you get time to read it. It takes place on a Halloween night. It takes place over the span of 24 hours on Halloween, from midnight to midnight. the opening chapter is one of the most, it just screams autumn at you. New England autumn for sure. So, there's there's Crossroads, there's so many, Night in the Lonesome October, of course. And I'll throw a few out at you guys a little bit later. Laurel, you said that you had a couple of paranormal stories to tell,
Oh,
or at least one.
yeah. It's kind of funny because before I had my son, I don't know, I was talking to one of my coworkers about something when I was pregnant, and I asked him something, with one of his kids, and he just looked blankly at me and said, I don't remember. And I thought that was so weird. But then I had a kid and I realized I don't remember anything that happened before that, or really, anything beyond like the last month. So it's one of those things that I know, like I had, some minor experiences myself growing up, but having my son, and I'll just say I'm fully a believer. I totally believe in ghosts. No problem if anybody doesn't, but I just feel like they're entirely too present to not believe in. And my son, it's my belief too that children are much closer to the veil and they're more likely to see and experience things like that. And it was all, I read a lot of horror. Like my big thing is always like, oh, I don't want to like tell them that there's nothing there. And then you close the door and the glowing red eyes are there and they're alone in their bed. I don't know if that makes me a good parent or just a weirdo, horror writer, but he interestingly has experienced some things that because they're for him are so much more, they were more scary for me. He was home with me for 15 months during lockdown. So we just went out every morning and, had our adventures, and we used to go to the Lexington Cemetery, which is beautiful. And he always had a great time there. And then once he sought out all kinds of stuff, was never bothered by anything. And then one day we were exploring and he saw this angel gravestone, monument. And he just froze and just stared at it. And I, kind of asked him what was wrong. And he just booked it. Like he took off running as fast as he could and went and hid behind another gravestone. And, he didn't really want to talk about it. So we just moved on. And then after that, it was weird. He started talking about shadow people in his room. And yeah, so I wasn't quite sure what to do with that because I didn't want to be like, oh my God, shadow people, that's horrible, but I also didn't want to be like, yeah, it's nothing.
Really fascinating topic too. We've talked about that a bit. Yeah. But
the shadow people
or, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Well, and it rang very true from the kind of things I experienced when I was a kid. It seemed, so I have a very good friend who's she's kind of up on crystals and that sort of thing. So she kind of helped me ease him over that. But I don't know whether he was already doing that stuff or it triggered something for him. But we quit going to the cemetery, of course. And we went to the Henry Clay Estate, Ashland. And we were just kind of exploring, we don't go in the house, but there's like a couple, it's like there's like a smokehouse, like a couple little freestanding structures you can walk into. And we're just kind of, going along, and we step into the smokehouse, and it's a room that's just no bigger than my office, fairly high ceilings, but there's really like nothing in it. There's like benches up against the wall. It's, there's really nothing in it. He steps in and then he freezes and he goes, Mommy, I don't like it. That man is looking at me. I was like, okay, well, fuck this. Let's go somewhere else.
Oh my God.
So now we go to Target a lot.
So you're not the only weird parent who brought their little kid to cemeteries, because I used to do that with Logan when he was smaller. He's 19 now, but yeah.
It's a great place. It's a great place to visit.
It's a great place to bring your kid. It's a great place to visit, but you don't want to stay there. You know what I'm saying?
No. Well, it's funny because that Lexington Cemetery actually apparently has a reputation as being like one of the most haunted cemeteries, which I thought was like, oh, really? Haunted? Okay, cool story. It's a cemetery. But when I talked to my girlfriend she'd had similar experience, she's like, oh yeah, no, I'm sorry, there's like some vortexes there. I'm like, oh, I feel like I should probably have looked into this previously. So yeah, we tend to I try to just stay attuned to his stuff, and then when he has a reaction, we just sort of go elsewhere.
Well, so I was going to read this one later, It's pretty short, but based on what you just told us, the story you just told us, I'll read this Robert Frost poem now, and it's called In a Disused Graveyard.
Ooh.
The living come with grassy tread to read the gravestones on the hill. The graveyard draws the living still, but never any more the dead. The verses in it say and say, the ones who living come today, to read the stones and go away. Tomorrow dead will come to stay. So sure of death the marbles rhyme, yet can't help marking all the time. How no one dead will seem to come. What is it men are shrinking from? It would be easy to be clever and tell the stones men hate to die and have stopped dying now forever. I think they would believe the lie. So
I love that.
snuck that in since you told us your story there.
His
So
poems remind me somewhat of Thomas Hardy's, which are kind of gloomy and existential and
yeah.
like that, and with the with the pastoral mixed in.
Before we go on, if you guys, anyone watching or listening to this now or later, can't get enough of us reading stories or true life paranormal stories, if you're a Patreon, which is only $5 a month, so it's price of a cup of coffee per month basically. But I did a Patreon podcast with Laird Barron about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and he told me some true life very strange things that have happened to him.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it'll the hairs on the back of your neck will go up, especially if you listen to this particular podcast at night. So I recommend listening to it at night, alone in the house, in the dark, or maybe for going down an old highway at 3 a.m. So that's the best time to listen to those.
I'll have to seek that out. I just yesterday finished Laird's novel Worse Angels, which it's like a thriller, like a detective thriller, crime thriller, but it's also a horror novel. It's very unsettling and creepy with all kinds of horrific implications.
So anyway, do you have something that you would like to read to us, Laurel, and then move over to Scott for a bit?
Yeah, sure. So what I'm going to read tonight is it's not one of mine. It's by a friend of mine. Her name is S.H. Cooper.
Sure.
She is a very, very talented author. Her most recent book that came out from the No Sleep podcast started a publication in print, and this was their flagship publication, was Inheriting Her Ghosts, which is gothic perfection. If you want to talk about something that's perfect to read on Halloween, highly, highly recommend it.
It's called what?
It's called Inheriting Her Ghosts.
And it's S.H. Cooper.
S.H. Cooper, yeah.
Her name sounds familiar.
Yeah, you've probably seen her stuff around. She's got a lot of stuff out there, and she's very. And I'm also always throwing her name out there because I think more people should read her.
Well, I'll definitely read that now for sure.
Good, I hope so. Yeah, I love that. I love that book.
Gothic perfection will get me to read something. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So
it's
that
good
way.
stuff. So she has allowed me to read a Halloween story that she wrote for the No Sleep Reddit thread. That's the whole thing that I don't know anything about, but it's super cool.
Yeah.
So this is called Stingy Jack. Jack-o'-lanterns were never part of my Halloween. Gran didn't allow them. She didn't approve much of any modern All Hallows Eve traditions, but especially not the carved pumpkins. A devil's gift to a damned soul, she'd say. Her Irish lilt was always thicker when she was reproachful. As long as I am under this roof, there won't be any of that. But Gran, I'd attempt to argue year after year, they're just pumpkins. Besides, weren't they made to scare away evil or something? She'd huff and wave a hand at me before reciting the tale of Stingy Jack, a nasty drunkard who was unwelcome in both heaven and hell. He'd been doomed to spend eternity wandering the darkness of purgatory, his only light source coming from a carved-out turnip containing an ember from hell. The sight of other jack-o'-lanterns was said to draw him, as he was always seeking out other souls to share in his misery, especially those with sin in their hearts, just like his. She'd end it with a short poem while making the sign of the cross over herself. If e'er you see the flickering light, held high in hollow turnip bright, turn ye round and fast away, for stingy Jack has come to pray. No matter what I said, she wouldn't change her mind. My parents weren't any help either. They thought keeping the peace with my very Catholic grandmother was worth more than a cut up pumpkin that would rot in a week. You get to do everything else, the costumes and such, Ma told me. Gran bites her tongue about that, so you can meet her in the middle. I doubt I would have cared so much, if at all, if Gran hadn't made such a big deal out of it. Like Ma said, she was able to tolerate everything else that accompanied Halloween, but jack-o'-lanterns were completely off the table, especially if they were lit. She'd cross streets so she didn't have to walk in front of them or make the sign of the cross if she couldn't avoid them. Going out after dark during the entire month of October was a challenge in finding the routes that had the least amount of smiling, glowing gourds. And that poem, I'd hear her muttering it like she was trying to ward off this stingy Jack. If e'er ye see the flickering light, held high in hollow turnip bright, turn ye round and fast away, for stingy Jack has come to pray. It was embarrassing. My friends poked fun at me for it whenever they saw how she acted, and being 12, I blamed Gran. If she weren't so weird, I could have the same normal Halloween as everyone else, complete with jack-o'-lantern. That was the year I decided I'd had enough. I wasn't proud of the fact that I was sneaking money from my parents' wallets even as I did it, but I told myself it would be worth it. It was only $10 after all. They wouldn't even miss it. I told Ma I was going to hang out with some neighborhood friends and rode my bike all the way to the convenience store. They had a small selection of pumpkins out front, all a bit dented and scratched, but I picked one out and paid for it. I kept it tucked under my sweatshirt the whole ride home and ran up to my room with it. You would have thought I was smuggling nudie magazines instead of a tiny pumpkin. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and cut into the orange rind. I'd seen enough friends do it to know I had to scoop out the insides, which was a messier process than I thought it would be. I almost panicked at just how much stuff came out and ended up flushing it little by little down the downstairs toilet. A prickling sense of guilty relief crept across my neck as I watched the last bit of pulp and seed wash away. I carved a crude single-toothed face into the front of the pumpkin and, as my final touch, put one of Ma's tea light candles inside. When I lit it, it cast a shadowy image of its face on the wall. I was so pleased, both with my jack-o'-lantern and with the fact that I hadn't been caught. There was an undeniable scent of pumpkin in my room, though, and I slid my window open just enough to sit my creation on the sill. I didn't see any other jack-o'-lanterns still lit at that late hour, which made mine stand out even more in my mind. A chilly wind blew in, causing the candle flame to dance, and I sat on my bed, my comforter pulled around my shoulders, and watched with a smile until it was time for sleep. I left my window open to finish airing out my bedroom. I'd blown out the candle, but the pumpkin stayed in its spot. I liked opening my eyes and seeing it there, my private show of defiance. As I drifted to sleep, I heard a muffled sound outside. It was distant, like it was coming from across the streets. Soft, slow footsteps. When I woke the next morning, I carefully hid my pumpkin in the back of the closet, where neither my parents or Gran would likely find it. I boasted about my little stowaway to my friends at school. It was such a stupid thing to be proud of, but that didn't stop me from bragging about it. I'd never really done anything to defy my parents before, and it gave me a little thrill. Gran must have sensed that I was up to something because at dinner that night, she studied me from across the table. "Aren't you smiling like the cat who caught the canary, Sam?" she said conversationally. I shrugged. "Something happened at school?" she asked. "No," I replied, keeping my eyes on my meatloaf. "Just a good day, I guess." "Well, that's good, love." She smiled warmly before looking from Ma to Dad. "The Gloucesters put out another one of their jacks. Did you see?" "Yes, Mum," Ma said with a sigh. "I tell them every year." I stopped listening at that point. I was convinced the Gloucester had added another pumpkin to their patch every year because she kept going over there to remind them about stingy Jack. At least I wasn't the only one who handled her superstitious nonsense by doing the opposite of what she wanted. I loved Gran, but it was beyond time for her to join us in 20th century America. As I had the night before, I waited for my family to go to bed before opening my window and resting my pumpkin on the sill. I lit the candle inside of it and sat in bed reading while it shined beside me. I'm not sure if I heard the footsteps or the breathing first. I was halfway through an action-filled chapter of my sci-fi novel when I became aware of the crunch of gravel and a low wheezing coming from outside. At first, I thought that it might have been Mr. Henderson, our elderly neighbor who enjoyed walking when he couldn't sleep, and ignored it. But Mr. Henderson never came up our driveway. The steps were slow and plodding, and they were getting closer. I sat up slightly, my book still half open in my hands, and turned toward the window. The breathing took on a raspy quality. Slowly, I set my book aside and slid out of bed. The hardwood floor was ice against my bare feet. My heartbeat started to quicken as I crept toward the open window where my jack-o'-lantern smiled down at the front yard. Carefully and cautiously, I peeked out of the corner of the window. It was dark outside, darker than I'd ever seen it. No street lights, no lights from the neighbors, just inky black, and a single bobbing spark coming slowly up the drive. A lantern. It swung slightly with every heavy footstep. Gran's voice whispered in the back of my mind, "If e'er you see the flickering light, held high in hollow turnip bright, turn ye round and fast away, for stingy Jack has come to pray." Goosebumps sprouted up my arms and back. In the glow of the lantern, the outline of a person was becoming visible, tall and stooped, terribly thin, wheezing with every step. I whimpered and backed away from my window. My jack-o'-lantern suddenly seemed too bright. The steps had stopped, but the breathing continued. It sounded almost like a growl. My heart thudded against my ribs, and I had backed up all the way to my bedroom door. I couldn't take my eyes off the window. Footsteps had stopped, I realized, but that deep-throated, snarling breathing was getting quicker, more eager. And then came the scratching. Nails digging into siding. A soft light stretched up towards my window, growing brighter and brighter. It was as carried up the front of my house. Fear, ice cold and sharp, lodged itself in my throat. I gaped, open mouthed, but unable to scream. A shape rose from the darkness, almost filling my window. The light from my pumpkin and the lantern illuminated a long, haggard face, grayed and aged by misery. His eyes, deeply sunken, stared in at me, and his lantern lent them a malevolent, hungry spark. "If e'er ye see the flickering light, held high in hollow turnip bright, turn ye round and fast away, for stingy Jack has come to pray." I never screamed like I did then, the screech of a terrified child. I was shoved inward when the door flew open behind me, toward the reaching hand of stingy Jack, but Gran caught me by the collar and pulled me back again. She didn't hesitate for a moment. She was shouting the Lord's Prayer and lunged at my window faster than any 70-something-year-old woman should be able to. There was a sharp, furious growl. The last thing I saw as my parents came running in to crouch in front of me was Gran hurling my small jack-o'-lantern into stingy Jack's face. I pushed past my confused parents to follow Gran as she stormed out of my room and down the steps, still shouting her prayers. I begged her not to go outside, but she shook me off and threw open the door. Pieces of pumpkin covered our front walkway, but nothing more. My parents thought Gran and I had gotten into a fight over me having a secret jack-o'-lantern and she'd thrown it from the window. I tried to tell them otherwise, but they didn't seem to believe me, even if they didn't stay mad at Gran. I guess if I wasn't upset with her, they didn't see need to be either. Gran just said she'd done what she had to do. Sometimes I think it might have been a night terror. Mostly, though, I'm positive of what I saw. I don't know why, out of all the houses decorated for Halloween, he'd have come to mine. Maybe because I'd stolen and lied and been proud of it. Gran always said he liked the company of other sinners best. Maybe it was because her belief was so strong that it had acted as some kind of a beacon. Maybe it was a bit of both. I don't know. I'll never know. I'll also never have another jack-o'-lantern. Every time I think it might be time to try and overcome a 20-year-old fear, I just think of those footsteps and breathing outside my window. I just think of that face lit by a turnip lantern. And I remember my Gran's voice. "If e'er ye see the flickering light, held high in hollow turnip bright, turn ye round and fast away, for stingy Jack has come to pray."
Okay,
Wicked.
so yes, I love if this writing thing doesn't work out, Laurel,
I can
you
do
have a
bad
great
accents instead.
no, that was a great accent.
Irish
actually.
accent was
Thank you.
That
excellent.
was that was right on point.
Thank
No, I
you.
was gonna say you have a future as a audio reader. Yeah.
Oh,
Definitely,
that would be fun.
So,
That would be
definitely.
fun.
yeah.
Thank
That's
you
a
so much.
great spooky story. That's perfect for Halloween. That was
That was.
Yeah, yeah, I loved it. So one more time, the author is S.H. Cooper. Go read her stuff and buy everything she writes. She's
kudos to
she's
her.
yeah, she's very versatile and really excellent writer. Thank you for letting me read her work on here.
Oh, of course, that was a great story,
Mhm.
and I will definitely. The name of the story that you said was Gothic Perfection again is what?
Inheriting Her Ghosts.
And Inheriting Her Ghosts. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, right now I'm reading a book. I'm about halfway through it called The 7 Visitations of Sidney Burgess, if I'm saying that last
Ooh.
name correctly, by Andy Marino. And it's, I can't quite put my finger on it, but this book is creeping me out more than anything I've read recently.
The
So
7 Visitations of
of Sydney with a Y. Burgess is Burgess by Andy Marino, Marino. I don't know Andy Marino, but if this book continues to be as good as the first half has been, I'll certainly seek him out and get him on the podcast, because this book's pretty unsettling. It's a novel, if I didn't say.
I just added it to my Goodreads.
Oh, good.
It's part of why I love having that app on my phone.
Dave on the live chat says, Mike, thank you for your recommendation years ago for the book Pen Pal. Jesus, that is a creepy book. Yeah, that's right up there too. The book Pen Pal. So I see by the look on the Thomas brothers' faces that they have not read it yet.
Who wrote Pen Pal?
His name is, because I've got his novel Bad Man right here. Dathan. It's like Nathan, but with a D. Auerbach, Auerbach. So anyway, little known fact, the reason why Jeff and Thomas's last names are the same is because they're brothers. And so they've told a lot of true life spooky things that have happened to him when they were growing up. But they mentioned something to me earlier this evening, and I said it did not ring a bell. They said that they didn't want to retell something they'd already told, but you guys said something about this particular tale, and I said I don't think you've said anything about this. So I thought we could go there next. If Scott, you want to start this?
Sure.
We haven't heard from you yet, so we'll make you talk first.
Certainly. It was the house of my Aunt Barbara on my dad's side, his sister, and her husband, Uncle Ralph. And for a number of years in the summer, we would go over there. Our father and Jeffrey and I would go over there. There was times when Craig and it was always around the 4th of July. And I remember family pictures where my mom and our younger brother, Craig, and we're all there. At any rate, it was a sort of a summer ritual for a number of years. And it's a sort of incongruous looking house to be a haunted house. It was this little 1-story, I guess you'd call it a ranch, and it was pink. And it was sort of haunted. And to preface, the concept of believing in ghosts, it aches against my logic and my perception of reality. And yeah, I've had lots of experiences and known people who've had experiences. So maybe it's just, it's real and we can't explain it. But at any rate, so I struggle with the concept. It's like, is there really such a thing? But at any rate, this is just another part of the history in my family of ghostly seeming events that makes me, really have to perhaps give credence to the concept of there actually being the hauntings. So at any rate, we would go there in the summer and to this place, and there were some spooky things there. And before we talk about the real ghostly stuff, Jeffrey, do you remember one time when we haunted the place by cutting out or drawing creepy faces and taping them in the cellar windows and stuff? And do you remember doing that?
I don't remember, but it sounds like something we do, because I remember we did that at Pine Grove Cemetery. We cut horrible faces out of famous monsters of filmland and tape them on gravestones in case people came walk in the graveyard and they'd see some. It would freak them out. So it sounds like something we would do.
That's great. I love that.
But we did it. We did it at the house too. I remember some years later too. Some of this ghostly faces we drew, in the little skinny cellar windows were still there, in the like webs and faded from sunlight there. But at any rate, so it was haunted. Did Jeffrey tell some of the actual ghosts?
Well, some of the things that I was told by my dad was that my Aunt Barbara had a little office room that she'd sit in, and sometimes a little boy would stand there watching her at her desk, and she wasn't afraid. She felt like that they were benign, but she said the little boy would stand there watching. And then my father was reading one night, late night, and he looked up, and there was a man standing right in front of him, and then kind of vanished. I remember they said their dog would watch things avidly, and like it was seeing something that they couldn't. And another weird little thing was my dad told me that whenever my Aunt Barbara would take like a sip of beer or something, she'd hear this little funny little giggling sound. So weird things like that, but they felt that there was a number of spirits in that house.
So this was all in the same house that all this
The
occurred
same
in?
the little pink house of my Aunt Barbara that Scott's referring to. Sometimes when we'd stay there during the summer, I'd sleep in that little office room, and all I could think of was the little boy who would come in and watch my aunt working in there, and I was like dreading it, but I never saw anything.
Well, because it sounds charming when it's not, at night when you're trying to sleep, and it's like, oh, is he going to come watch me?
Yeah,
and I was about to say, there's nothing more beautiful than a child's giggle, unless it's, as they say, 3 a.m. and you don't have a child.
Yeah.
Well, he was an accountant, and the little blonde boy seemed fascinated by her typing her little adding machine, or
yeah,
they're doing that. And there was another time, our dad told us, where he saw something levitate off the fire mantle.
Yes.
Did it float across the room or something, or just move? I forget the particulars of where it went, but it lifted up and floated.
I remember him saying that. Yeah.
He said he and his sister, our Aunt Barbara, where he said they were fae. He said they could communicate without talking sometimes, just like telepathy. Maybe she was like, or they were conduits in a sense. Who knows?
Wow, I don't know if any of y'all have read Hunter Shea's. I think it just got re-released. It's called The Waiting, and it's he and his family lived in a haunted house for like 20 years. And it just made me think of it, I won't tell his story, but it made me think of it because, it was a little boy, and he would be always like watching them. And he said like when they moved, it was like kind of sad, it's like they were moving away from this little boy. But yeah, this was like, it's, it's a bit of, it's a lot of it's true, but I know some of it's fictionalized. But that's another one I would really recommend, The Waiting, especially if you like the true life stuff. That's really good.
Is it waiting as in WAIT?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Oh, that sounds creepy. My sister just sent me a text. I don't know if we've ever told this story before, but she wanted to put it on the chat, but she didn't know how. She said, I also wanted to tell Mike a scary real life story. Not sure if you remember the time on Cottage Street when I left Ross asleep on the living room couch to run upstairs to buy cigarettes, when I ran uptown to buy cigarettes. And when I came back and put my hand on the doorknob to open the door, it turned in my hand before I had a chance to open it, as if some entity watching over Russ wanted me to get back in the house to him. I remember her telling me that story. She put her hand on the knob, and the knob turned in her hand before she turned it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I know that people can say, that there's all kinds of ways that could be interpreted and explained. And I get that. I totally get that. But I also feel like when it is that sort of experience, like, you were saying, like almost like the telepathic, like communication, it's like you have this feeling of this other, it's not just the, a weird mechanism or a weird malfunction. It's this feeling,
you sense,
of this. Yes.
What's behind it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we have 5 senses, and there's so much to the universe, to the world, that those 5 senses can't perceive, just even speaking scientifically, sounds that are pitched higher and lower than our ears can hear. Um,
Hmm.
Wavelengths of light that we can't see, but are definitely there. So who's to say? You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm more of the bent of, you know, I like to go where the evidence leads, but I also have an open mind. So yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm glad she texted that to you, Jeff. All right. I'm gonna read another poem, and then Scott, what are you going to read for us tonight?
I'm going to read Mr. Woodbridge's Visit.
Okay. All right. Here's another Robert Frost poem that you guys have to put up with. Snow falling and night falling fast, oh fast, in a field I looked into going past, and the ground almost covered smooth in snow, but a few weeds and stubble showing last. The woods around it have it, it is theirs. All animals are smothered in their lairs. I am too absent spirited to count, the loneliness includes me unawares. And lonely as it is, that loneliness will be more lonely ere it will be less, a blanker whiteness of benighted snow, with no expression, nothing to express. They cannot scare me with their empty spaces between stars, on stars where no human race is. I have it in me so much nearer home to scare myself with my own desert places. Robert Frost. So.
You're right. There's a lot of Robert Frost that's very just kind of dark and applicable to
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Like I said, it has a kind of existential quality.
Yes.
Well, as I said earlier tonight, you know, Poe is the obvious go-to, and other poets like him, but I wanted to read someone that maybe the audience hadn't considered as a dark poet. And yeah, a lot of Robert Frost's stuff is this pastoral that most people might associate with him, but a lot of it's dark or autumnal as well. So, you know, that line, they cannot scare me with their empty spaces between stars, on stars where no human race is.
Yeah,
you know,
that's great.
Yeah, especially coming from Frost, you know. So
yeah, you always think of him as like a prosaic kind of a poet, but
yeah,
that's deeper, darker stuff.
All right, well, maybe we got a few more stories, true life stories to tell, but before we do that, Scott, you want to read your story?
I shall. So it is from my collection, Urn and Willow. So it's Mr. Woodbridge's Visit. Massachusetts, 1836. All across Amesboro, families huddled in dim parlors, owl-eyed by fires as autumn winds rushed and rasped and made windows tremble in their frames. The hour was late, and while most of the inhabitants should have been tucked under covers dreaming, this was not the case. Fathers, mothers, children, and hirelings waited, fidgeting, saying little, or talking inexhaustibly for the sake of distraction. Such was the situation in the humble Brown house in the eastern part of town, where the trees were all but bare and the chill hand of the season held sway. Abner Brown, lean, white-capped and weathered, was the oldest person in the house. He occupied the comfiest chair and sat with a blanket over his legs, his feet near the logs. His two grandchildren, a boy of 10 and a girl of 12, were close on low stools. Whereupon I said to Barrows, "It can't be much farther beyond that hill." The old man was telling a story that all the other Browns in the room were familiar with, a tale which under other circumstances would have been welcomed like a comfortably worn piece of clothing. But tonight his words were little more than a drone in preoccupied minds. Abner's son Tristram, who had proven successful as a joiner and owned the building the family occupied, was at the window with one of the curtains pulled slightly from the panes so that he could peer out. His body was pressed to the wall off to the side as if he expected a rhinoceros to come bursting through at any moment. His wife, Anne, who sat close to the blaze across from her father-in-law, watched Tristram intently, her face tight. Neglected knitting sat in her lap, the wrinkles in her punched apron like black spoons. She observed her husband as he squinted and craned, and as he let the curtain drop back in place before returning quietly to his own chair. He lighted, seeming to give ear to his father's tale, but was up and back at the window after a moment. Abner Brown broke off from his telling and scowled. "You'll have a path worn in the floor afore the night is through, Tristram." "Would you have me sit and do nothing?" Tristram countered, not so respectful to his father as he usually was. "What more is there to do, son? If he comes, he comes." Olive, the girl, face awash in firelight, looked up, her voice a tremble. "Do you think he shall come here, grandfather?" The old man gave her a small, almost sad smile. "I can no more say it if it should or should not rain, though my bones do tell me that at times." "Do your bones tell anything of Mr. Woodbridge?" Abner chuckled. "Nothing, alas." Olive, looking very serious, said, "I wish him to visit the Bixbys, they being such an unfriendly lot." Olive, looking very... And the woman of the house spoke up. "Don't wish such a thing upon a soul, Olive." Ordinarily, the children would be off to their beds on the second floor by that hour, but Anne wanted them in sight, considering the circumstances. "Mother," it was the boy Timothy who spoke this time, the fern green of his eyes subdued by the parlor's gloom. "May I have Phineas in the house?" "No, you may not." Phineas was the barn cat, the dearest creature in the world to Timothy. Anne, like her mother before her, did not care for cats in the house. "May I then go to see that he is well?" The woman straightened. "You may certainly not." "But..." The boy's father looked away from the window long enough to mutter, "No one goes outside this night." Timothy turned his face back to the fire to conceal moist eyes. Abner, the patriarch, offered what he thought was reassurance. "You mustn't worry yourself, Timothy, it not being animals that Woodbridge is after." Olive, speaking to her brother's concern, countered, "But Mr. Woodbridge once kicked a dog to death." The grandfather perked. "Did he then?" Timothy swiveled back around on his stool and spoke excitedly. "Yes, he killed Calvin Moore's dog, which would be the reason the Moore boys did nothing when Mr. Woodbridge went into the river." Old Abner thought on that a moment, then mused, "He was a foul character to be sure, but to let a man drown for the sake of having killed a dog?" Tristram was staring out the window. The pane closest to his face was fogged from close breath and squeaked when he rubbed it with his hand. Outside there was wind and moonlight, the moonlight applied in daubs and slashes on the canvas of a black New England night. The trees and hills, even the passing road looked unfamiliar, sparingly defined as they were. The Bixby's roof, a little down the way, was not much more than a silvery smudge behind the dark veins of a bald maple. Abner finished his story, but no one seemed to notice. He yawned, sipped his mint tea, and was about to launch into another reminiscence when his son cried out from the window. "There, I see him, Woodbridge." All of those sitting round a hearth launched up from their seats and clamored for the window. Even old Abner, who, forsaking his cane, moved faster than anyone had seen him move in years. The curtains were wrenched aside and a flock of faces pressed up to the panes, expecting to see a tall, shadowy man in a windy coat walking along the road amongst the winging leaves. "I see nothing," Abner whined. There, there," Tristram pointed. "Haste away from the windows or he should see us." Anne narrowed her eyes and cupped her hands around her face, spotting the thing her husband had indicated. She stepped back abruptly and glared. "That is a bush, Tristram. You've given with a lot of us a terrible fright, all for the sake of a bush. Tristram stammered, a bush, but I... Anne, her children, and her father-in-law shuffled back to the fireplace, grumbling. Tristram took another look and cursed himself. Certainly, with a breath on the glass and a heart in the ears and leaves flying wildly in the night's ungenerous illumination, a man might imagine strange things. Still, he felt a fool. For all his watching, he hadn't noticed the bush until the wind and moonlight caught it just right. It was perched on the opposite side of the road, its limbs more than half stripped of their leaves, thrashing in the wind. Anne, with her hands on her hips and a tremble in her voice, said, 4 years now he's been coming back. One would think we'd have sense enough to just move to some other town and be done with worrying over who will be next, whose door he'll come knocking on. To which Tristram said, I'll not be chased off by that thing. Fed up with the whole event, Abner rose from his chair and announced, Woodbridge or no Woodbridge, I'm off to bed. I'll have some sleep, even if it be my last. The moon glided patiently, noiselessly toward the west, high above the fields and shedding trees, high above dispersing chimney smoke and the little roofs of Amesborough. The shifting of frosty light rearranged the shadows on the road and all around the Brown house, a circumstance which tormented poor Tristram, who time and time again mistakenly perceived menacing shapes as the shifting of the light brought this or that harmless object into partial definition. Bushes became lurching figures with tattered arms, tree trunks mocked the stoic, silhouetted semblance of horrid old Woodbridge. Tristram saw these threats in increasing numbers as the hours passed, as sleep and agitation wrestled for ownership of his mind. The house was no longer filled with voices since Abner and the children had gone upstairs to bed, and having resigned to allowing the exhausted younglings to move out of her sight. The wind made an effort to fill the space the family conversations had occupied, humming in the chimney, huffing across the windows, hissing where drafts found ingress. The human intonations belonged to Tristram and Anne, and their interchanges were quiet and infrequent. Anne wondered, why does he not simply kill off all in the village at once, rather than claim only one soul a year, if he so hates the folks of Amesborough? To which Tristram said, who can know the ways of the unhappy dead? They did not speak again for some time. Anne stayed close to the fireplace, which provided the only light in the humble parlor, as Tristram skulked from darkened room to darkened room, listening for anything out of the ordinary, peering through one window, then another. He moved deliberately, as if fearful that a heavy step would be heard beyond the walls of the house and draw the attention of an unwelcome visitor. This made it all the more startling to Anne when he charged into the family parlor with wild eyes and a flintlock pistol in hand. Did you not hear it? He sputtered. Anne looked as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. Hear what? A noise, a thump, a door. I heard nothing, Tristram. And what good do you suppose a gun will prove against a dead man? Tristram did not speculate or answer that particular inquiry. Rushing to the windows at the front of the house, he said, It's Woodbridge, I tell you. I heard him. Wind hummed and huffed and hissed as the man pushed his body up against the wall, staying clear of the window. He clicked back the cock of the gun, and just as he peeked around the curtain, he heard a scream come flying on the wind. Anne flinched, then shot up from her chair, and was at the window in a flash, pulling aside the hangings to look out. Another shriek came, a cry of despair more than terror. Tragic howling rode on the leaf-winged wind. Tristram and Anne turned to stare at each other. The tension that had held their faces tight for so many hours lifting from their features. They smiled great smiles and spoke simultaneously. The Bixbys! They shared a sigh. Woodbridge had visited the Bixby house just down the road. It was over. The long, horrible waiting was over. Only after a moment of almost giddy alleviation could they grant any empathy for the neighbors who had just lost a family member. An awful thing, Anne noted. The words were hardly out of the woman's mouth when the sound of the side door banging open shook the room. Tristram barked out a terrified sound that wasn't even a word and charged into the kitchen with his weapon thrust out. Wind had flung the door wide and a figure was stepping into the house. The pistol bellowed and flashed. A small person stood there dazed, a dark, wet hole in the nightshirt. Timothy had sneaked downstairs and out to the barn to make sure that Phineas the cat was safe. The boy wobbled for a moment and then fell backward off the stoop. Tristram and Anne stared in disbelief. They rushed through the room and then through the doorway and knelt by the body. Their cries rang out, joining those from the Bixby house, rising in a chorus of pitiful wailing that sailed into the windy leaves and blue moonlight of a chill October night.
That's great.
Awesome.
Last line. Love
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah. Very
Maybe after that,
atmospheric.
there'll be, Timothy will be haunting the town as well.
Laurel, I'm curious if you have another true life paranormal experience that you can pass on or not.
Um, I'm trying to think because so much of it was just, like little kind of snippet things, that would happen. Like
Yeah.
I'm Southern, so like we definitely see our family members after they die. That's just like a thing.
Yeah.
So my uncle passed away when I was 18, and um he appeared to me a few times. I just started college, and he showed up in the mirror behind me a couple of
Oh
times.
my God.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
And
and it's
so what was your reaction when this happened? How'd you-
it's so weird, and I don't know if it's just because he was family, or not, but like, so I've always had like just a terrible stomach. I'm like the slightest thing makes me totally nauseous, and
Mhm.
the anxiety of starting school and stuff. I was sick a lot, during that first quarter, and I started calling him the patron saint of nausea because a lot of times it's like when he would show up. This is such an odd thing. I don't know if y'all have noticed this too, or if this is within your experience, but whenever I see a person, they never have an expression on their face, and I don't know if that's what that's about. It's not like it's angry or sad or anything like that. It's just kind of expressionless, and I sort of interpret that to be like maybe there's an effort involved in in appearing, and but if every time he would show up, I would feel better. And he usually would show up when I was sick. I had this 8 o'clock class I had to get to, and I would get up and be trying to get my stomach back under control before I went. And it's not like it happened every time, but he showed up a couple times, and it just, so yeah, I don't know. It was like a little bit startled seeing someone in the mirror behind me because there was, no one else in the bathroom. But other than that, it was more just, I don't know, just kind of peaceful. So yeah, most of the things that I saw were family.
Yeah.
I heard his voice a couple times, and same for my grandmother, and and things like that. So it's more just kind of feeling those connections. The other kind of, there was a weird little, I don't, it's weird to say it without like sounding kind of pretentious, but since you're, familiar with the shadow people thing,
Yeah.
which is also interesting. Short side note, my husband has a library card too. It is seminary to the seminary academy, and they have this just really cool, or they did before they box lotted up, this amazing library. And interestingly, a lot of it were like these like true life, accounts. And I picked up this really interesting one by a pastor, and it was like from the 1930s or something. But that was exactly what he described was shadow people, was something darker than the night around it.
Right.
And I thought that was so interesting. And so my family, when we left California, we moved to Tennessee, and we rented this horrible house on top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere. It was awful. And being teenagers, my sister and I weren't speaking very much because, we were adolescent and angry at everything. Otherwise, we would have compared notes and probably been more scared. But I lived upstairs, she lived down. And a lot of times, several times, I would wake up and there would be something very dark leaning over me in bed.
Oh,
And it would
shit.
always be between me and my lamp. And it would just, I'd be like you do, like not moving, like, oh, it's a T-Rex, it won't see me, right? And it just leans closer until I'd finally freak out and turn on the lamp. Well, I'm just, at that point I'm thinking like, okay, I'm just getting spooked or whatever. But after we moved out of it, my sister had the same exact experience.
Oh,
It would come
wow.
and do the exact same thing to her. It was not a very old house. It's like a 7-year-old house. Nothing we know of that happened there, but something kind of creepy and unsavory was hanging out.
That is a really creepy story.
Very dramatic.
I did not dig
Yeah.
that house.
Yeah, there's a lot of accounts of shadow people, and in fiction too. I can't let the night pass without mentioning old time radio, and I know that Scott and Jeff share my love of old time radio, especially horror old time radio. But there's one from the Hall of Fantasy called The Shadow People, which is one of the scarier old time radio shows.
Yes.
Yeah. Of course, your favorite and one of my favorites, Scott, is the house in Cypress Canyon from Suspense, the show Suspense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty spooky one too.
Oh.
But yeah, if you like old time radio, you're on the YouTube page now, unless I've converted this to audio later, which I probably will, and you're listening to it only. But Lovecraft eZine YouTube page, I've got a playlist of Tuesday nights. Usually we've been doing at the same time, 8 o'clock Central, 9 Eastern, old time radio shows, horror old time radio. So, which I just prepare ahead of time and usually do 2 episodes. So, and if you're not, it's like everything else I do on this channel. If you can't watch it live, you can watch it later. So, all right. Got another Robert Frost poem, and then I want to see what else you guys have. This will be my last one of the evening. Another autumnal one. This one's called Into My Own. One of my wishes is that these dark trees, so old and firm they scarcely show the breeze, were not as 'twere the merest mask of gloom, but stretched away unto the edge of doom. I should not be withheld, but that some day into their vastness I should steal away, fearless of ever finding open land or highway where the slow wheel pours the sand. I do not see why I should ever turn back, or those should not set forth on my track to overtake me, who should miss me here and long to know if I still held them dear. They would not find me changed from him they knew, only more sure of all I thought was true. I love that poem, but especially the first stanza.
It was wonderful.
Yeah. One of my wishes is that these dark trees, that's a great stanza.
You have a great reading voice for poetry too, especially Mike.
He does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I should mention, if you guys, and especially you, Scott, since I know you're on your phone and not your computer, if you guys can't see the comments, every time you guys read, you get a lot of kind comments on the side there. So
I don't.
I always look at the back. I go back later when it's archived at YouTube, and I go through the comments.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Brian Keene said to tell everybody night. He's ducking out. He's been listening to you
Night,
guys.
Brian. Thank you for coming.
That's cool.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want to talk about or read or anything?
I want to know which one of you is going to write the pink house haunted story, because I would read that.
That's all. The pink house. Dun dun dun.
It's so innocuous but a little bit threatening.
Yeah, that's cool. That juxtaposition of the innocuous with the ominous.
One of my favorite Halloween stories of all time is Jeffrey's story, The Yellow House, which is like,
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
I love reading Halloween.
I read that one time on one of these shows, I think. I believe.
Is that
Well,
in a collection somewhere?
Yeah. Yeah, it's in, I think it's in a couple of my collections.
Mhm.
It's one of my
I-
old
It's an IE.
yeah, it's a
Yeah,
A,
yeah.
A, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. That's the name of the book.
So easy to Google that, you know.
Yeah.
Well, if you like this kind of stuff, and I assume you do if you're listening, of course, Scott Thomas and Jeff Thomas are both very talented guys, but very different writers. And Scott's very, I would say, autumnal writer. So I am going to read one that I've read before, very short story of Scott's. And I'm surprising him because I haven't even told him I'm going to do this. But it is in a collection called Over the Darkening Fields, and it's called Winter Census.
Mm.
All right, so this will only take a couple of minutes because it's a very short story. But I think you guys, anyone who hasn't heard this story or read this story, will really enjoy it. And even if you have, I've read it 3 or 4 times. All right, Winter Census. This isn't a story about the conventional horrors of homeless life. Not that I couldn't fill volumes with that stuff. But since you asked me for the most disturbing thing I've seen, I'll tell you. It was late December and I was a volunteer with a group working for the mayor's office. It was an annual event. Our task was to go around the city and take account of all the homeless people we could find. It was only my second time, though I'd been involved with the shelters for several years and I'd organized food drives and things of that nature going back 9 or 10. I was accompanied by a young guy named Don who was an EMT, and Father Ed Willard, a priest who had dedicated so much time and soul to looking after the disadvantaged that he had been written up in a national news magazine and had made a number of appearances on local television. We were quite the dedicated crew. The winter had been mild up until that night, generally speaking, though it's true what they say about New England weather. It can change in a flash. It's best not to get complacent, even with a long stretch of merciful temperatures. It can drop down to a wind chill of 30 degrees below faster than you can say hypothermia. That night, we got the first real wintry stuff of the season. It was bitter cold and snowing pretty good. Windy, too. A ragtag army of vehicles spread out to explore the city, armed with flashlights and blankets. I don't mind telling you that the census adventure could be frightening at times. We would venture into some pretty rough areas and there were some scary characters around. Ever drive through Roxbury after dark? I think if I were to go again, I'd want to carry a gun, especially after that night. It didn't take us long. They were huddled in doorways, in alleys, and places you wouldn't believe. People can get pretty creative and fit their bodies into some strange places in order to get out of the cold. We had to joke to keep each other's spirits up because the tragedy factor was so profound. I remember an old lady we found curled up on a grid to catch the heat that came up. She had a flattened refrigerator box over her head and snow had coated it. She was clinging to an old beat up stuffed dog toy, and her coat pockets were filled with empty bottles. She seemed to be somewhat retarded. Images like this made me feel like murdering career welfare abusers. Excuse me. My tax dollars were doing nothing for that suffering old woman, while I'd known a few young breed-for-bucks mothers and smug young men who bragged about what a great country America was, because besides working a job, they benefited from food stamps and Medicare. One encounters a lot of injustice out on the streets. Don thought the woman's breathing was bad and that she was a good candidate for frostbite. We decided to call an ambulance. Turns out she ended up losing a few toes. Well, I'll get to the point, seeing as it's getting kind of late. We had gone into the north end where there were a great deal of old brick buildings. We parked, then crunched along the snow while flakes whirled down through the pink haze of the street lamps. Father Willard became concerned that he couldn't find a Vietnam vet named Reggie, who usually stayed in this particular indented area behind a building between two dumpsters. Hey, Don had said, look at this. Don was pointing at what appeared to be drag marks, wide as if someone had been pulled along the pavement on his back. We followed them out to the street and saw that they led to an alley which, due to the snow, was not as dark as it normally would have been. Don thought he saw someone extremely tall flit by the opening of the alley, but Father Willard said that Reggie was a very short man. We were starting over, squinting through the slanting snowfall, when we saw these three strobe-like flashes of red come from inside that alley. We ran. I was the first one to see it. At the far end of the alley, where the strewn trash was smoothed over in gentle waves by the accumulated white, there was a blackened heap of steaming human bones. The stench was enough to make you sick. Dear God, Father Willard said. What the hell happened? I asked, squinting down at the pieces that were stacked like so much kindling. He must have built a fire to keep warm, Don offered weakly. I wondered how he could have burned down so thoroughly. I mean, there was no sign of scorched clothing, no suggestion of skin, muscle, or organs. There were only bones. Maybe, Don conjectured, somebody killed him and set the corpse on fire. I nodded. In these days, when teenage kids were killing each other over sneakers and jackets, it was quite likely that someone would kill a poor homeless guy for kicks and then set him on fire. Hopefully, he was already dead before the flames were lit. Although this theory offered a reasonable explanation as to how the man was burned, it did not explain the high degree of incineration. I'm going out to the car to phone the police, I said. I was halfway to the vehicle when I paused. I had just passed the opening of another alley when I saw a great shadow sweep across the snow in front of me. Even taking into account the fact that a shadow would have appeared stretched at such an angle, I determined that whoever made it would have had to have been over 7 feet tall. The silhouette showed a figure in a long, cloak-like garment with a hood, carrying some type of staff. There seemed to be a wild crown of bare branches and twigs sticking up from the head, and fir branches tied to it, so that they stuck out from the shoulders and wound around the sleeves. I was startled, and only for a brief moment, as this shadow passed, I spun around. I saw only for a brief moment as this shadow passed. I spun around. The mouth of the alley was empty, but for the windy, fluttering snow. It was a long and bitter night. The snow continued to fall steadily until there were several inches. We had counted as many stray souls as possible before returning home to our own safe homes, our cozy beds. Strangely enough, we not only tallied up the number of homeless, there was another count taken, a grim and perplexing one. For on that night, 12 sets of smoky, blackened human bones were found in the snow-haunted alleys of Boston.
Ooh.
Creepy.
Yep, one of my favorite Scott Thomas stories.
I love you reading that, Mike.
Oh, thank you.
Just the phrase "steaming bones," like as soon as you hear that, it's just like, oh, that is.
Yeah,
that
just
cannot be good.
nothing good comes from that usually,
No.
from that phrase.
Unless you're having a barbecue.
The wings.
Yeah.
Yeah, steaming chicken bone wings.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as Scott says many times in his stories, explain nothing, as he said one time on a podcast that I was listening to as a writer.
That's
So,
effective.
yes. So anyway, unless you guys have anything else before we sign off for the night.
I don't think so.
Well,
We could run forever. If that's what.
yeah, we could. Well, we do this occasionally when it's not Halloween, read some stories. Scott and Jeff and I do on Tuesday nights, maybe once every couple of months or so. And then the Tuesday nights that we don't, I do old time radio. So, hope you'll join us around the virtual campfire for that. Of course, we have the Sunday podcast, and yeah. Tonight I've got the Kindle book and I've got the audio book of the 7 visitations of Sidney Burgess, and it's a creepy story. So can't quite put my finger on why or what makes it so much creepier than anything I've read lately. So, but it definitely is. So, well, okay. So Laurel has written a novella called Crossroads, which I very highly recommend.
Sounds great.
Yeah, Laurel,
Thank
you want to remind everyone else what else you have out there and what you have coming up?
Yeah, I also have my debut novel was Whispers in the Dark. That's a little bit more of a genre mashup, kind of a thriller, police procedural, ghost, SWAT, guns, that kind of thing.
Of course.
I also co-edited the charity anthology We Are Wolves with Gemma Amore and Cynthia Paleo. And that is all proceeds for that go towards survivors of sexual assault. And
Great.
some other, when I sold some copies at Scarce Care, and we did that charity. So and then I have a bunch of short fiction coming out in anthologies, and then I am co-editing The Dead Inside with Dark Dispatch, Sandra Rutten, who does most of the actual hard work. I'm kind of a slacker, but that'll be that'll be coming out later this year, and I'm very, very excited about all the authors we picked up for that, and I'm really excited to get it out there. Thank you very much for having me on. Well,
thanks for coming on. So just Google Laurel Hightower or go to Amazon and type in Laurel Hightower. Scott's got what's the book you have coming out? The Veil of the White Horse.
Veil of the White Horse and Other Strange British Tales, and you wrote a beautiful blurb for me, so thank you again for that, Mike.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, actually I had your book up here, so you've got a blurb from Jeff Vandermeer too. Thomas's sensitivity tempered by darkness is his strength, and the reader's delight. That's a nice blurb from Vandermeer. Mine, because this is how I think of Scott. Reading Scott Thomas is like watching autumn leaves whisper down the street, like feeling a soft rain on your face at dusk on an October day. In his stories, one always feels like it's Halloween, that time when the lines blur between our world and another one. So
that's beautiful.
That's a beautiful blurb. Yeah,
that captures the tone very well.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to reading that, Scott.
Thanks.
And what do you got? Like your brother does, so many books out. But what do you have out lately, and what's coming out, Jeff?
On Halloween, a chapbook of 6 stories, little short stories that kind of combine into one mosaic story is coming out. It's called Scenes from a Village, from Oddness, which is the publisher of Forbidden Futures magazine, and it's gonna premiere on Halloween. How's this working now? It's gonna come out 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 12 a.m. Pacific Time, during which time on their website, which is forbiddenfutures.com, it will be a free flip book, although not a download. After which it will be available the next day for purchase as a chapbook. And it's a beautiful little illustrated chapbook.
That's a cool way to
premiere a book. It's cool. It was
forbiddenfutures.com.
Yeah, forbiddenfutures.com. So from 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Halloween to 12 a.m. Pacific Time, it'll be a free flip book, not a download, after which it will be available for purchase. And like I said, it's 6 mini stories set in my fictitious Southeast Asian country called the Unnamed Country.
We're at
And
six,
co-
six, is that 6 Eastern to 12 Eastern? Because you said
I
Pacific.
don't know why, but the email I received about it said 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 12 a.m. Pacific Time. I'm not sure quite how that works out, but
It probably meant to do Eastern, but
perhaps.
get there at 6 Eastern, people, and you'll be okay.
Yeah. Yep. And Cody Goodfellow did a blurb for it, in which he says Jeffrey Thomas's unique flair for the unspeakable never shines brighter than when he visits the Southeast Asia of his dreams, and nowhere does he delve deeper into that strange green country than here.
Wow.
Nice.
Well, I'm sorry, but if Cody Goodfellow blurbed it, I'm going to have to give it a pass.
Oh, I shouldn't have said that.
I'm kidding.
I shouldn't have said it.
I'm kidding. Did a great podcast with him and Laird and Philip Fracassi.
Yeah, I watched that.
Yeah, about 6 or 7 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Talk
about some talents.
I don't know this person's real name, but Awake Enlightened. They mentioned a quote from Charles Grant, who I'm glad you brought Charles Grant up before we go. If you're not familiar with Charles Grant, he's very much the quiet horror type of writer and editor. He died in, I believe, 2006, but he's got a lot of books out there. This quote is really good that this person quoted. Asked if I could characterize my protagonists, I hesitated only a moment before saying they're lonely.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really, right? So I met virtually Laurel roughly a year ago, something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
And Laurel's got a lot of talent. I'm really glad to have met you.
Thank you so much.
We should probably address the elephant in the room before we go, or should I say the cat in the room? I'm sorry, I can't resist. So in Crossroads, your novella, which is a very dark book, there is one paragraph where their protagonist says something about their cat, which is, I think, not very woke when it comes to cats. So I mean, I'm not trying to criticize, but so what do you remember what you wrote, right?
Yeah, it was
because you get so much shit for it from everybody.
Yeah, unexpected.
Not just me.
No, definitely not just you. No. That she comes home to her, to her empty house, but she's got this cat, Penny Lane, and Penny Lane comes running up and she feeds her and she says, she accepted the food or purred, something like that, with a gratitude unusual in her species. And I think that was like the first question you asked me was like, so
yeah,
cats are ungrateful?
Yeah. And when I interviewed you, I'm like, so, you know what, Laurel, my cats purr when I feed them. So I don't know what kind of cats you're used to, but so
mine were very sweet boys, but they were, there was something lacking in gratitude. I thought that was just
they were entitled.
They were very much loved and, frankly entitled to that adoration, but little entitled.
They could be aloof.
They were
aloof. Yeah.
They were cute. The problem was they knew it. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Oh yeah. I said that to you, and you said a lot of people mentioned that passage to you.
Yeah, so. I will. They have sadly both passed on now, but my kitty boys were Yattering and Jack. So
wow.
Yeah. They were good little pair.
Yeah, it's just a controversy that won't die down. But
no.
Despite this,
kill as many people as you want in a story, but don't diss cats.
Yeah, don't diss cats. Exactly.
All the cats lived, though, in case anyone's concerned about it. Okay. All of it, the cat was fine.
Yeah, and that is the most important thing.
It is
that the animals live. So
yeah.
So anyway, thanks to all of you who are are listening now or, you know, at a later date, happy Halloween to everybody. Thanks to those who, a couple people gave me some money during the show. So thanks, appreciate it. I really do. Every little bit helps. So, and thanks to you three for being here. I really appreciate it. So,
Absolutely. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
inviting me. This was great.
Thanks
Yeah.
as always.
some great
Always.
reads and
Always fun.
Mhm.
yeah. All right. Well, we'll do this again next year. But in the meantime, everybody have a great Halloween and have a great evening. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Happy